Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
And here's number 139 in Sounding the Shallows.
Yes, quite a big number.
Yeah. We talked last week about moving house and about the fact that it was not our finest hour. We won't go into it, but it really was chaos cubed.
Yeah, you can always listen to last week's and fill in just Adrian's special moments.
But when you tell people things like this, obviously they come up with their own stories, and some of them are really quite extraordinary. There's one here about them moving into their house, and they decide to get the bed sorted out, and they can get to bed as soon as they got everything sorted, and her husband agreed. And unfortunately for them, and unknown to them, there was also a dodgy light fitting in the downstairs hall. We had that once, didn't we? We got a shock from it.
Yeah.
So every time they carried something in, they hit the light, obviously, and all the lights fused in the house.
I mean, that's bad enough, but apparently after the fifth time, Jim, her husband, was getting quite expert at going down into the cellar in the dark or by candlelight to flip the switch and return the light to normality. But tell them what happened on the sixth visit.
On the sixth visit, and this is the trouble with thinking you've sorted something. On the sixth visit, an electric shock knocked him across the cellar.
That's
and
awful.
He said, "Enough is enough, and let's leave it till tomorrow." And she said, "I didn't really want to be a widow within 6 months of my marriage, so we did leave it at that." And she was very glad. She got the bed made in advance, so very tired. They went to bed early in the dark and started again next day once they found an emergency electrician.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that vivid picture of what happened.
I don't
to
know
you.
if any of you did hear last week, but we were talking about a moment, part of this finest hour, where two bowling balls rolled out of the back of our car down the ramp, which is we have for the power chair, followed by a loan of our car,
yeah.
Just before we actually moved away, with our new owner of our house standing looking, I think, in some puzzlement at this clown-like exodus. But and I mentioned the fact that after these two bowling balls, a lone kiwi fruit, for some reason in the back of our car, what it was doing, rolled down behind the bowling balls.
I think we said it rolled solemnly down.
Well, it did. I think it was saying, well, hey, what an adventure. Where are the bowling balls going? I'm going anyway. That triggered off some great stuff from somebody we know.
So this is somebody we know who's I've had some correspondence with, particularly over bananas, because she is anti-banana.
Well,
I am extremely pro-banana.
All that time ago, when we were talking about fruit in those very early days during the pandemic, and she decided she was an A1 banana hater. That's
she did.
Right.
So she says, in our household, kiwi fruit are always preceded by the epithet magic, because they are magic. Well, actually an enzyme in them that makes them so effective, but we call it magic. And she talks about when she was in hospital in New Zealand, and
No, she wasn't in New Zealand. She was having to have surgery.
She was having surgery
and the nurse
in New Zealand.
from New Zealand.
That's right. And so that doctors in hospital in New Zealand often prescribe kiwi fruit after surgery because it has, well, won't go into that, but they're very effective for one part of the recovery process.
Yes, I think she then got quite carried away, Adrian, because, and this might be something that triggers off some ideas in you, but she started thinking about scripture and where you can find
Go on, and where you can find fruit
in the Bible, or
that's
food
right.
things in the Bible, and she thought she'd found a few.
Well, the trouble with you is, if I'm addressing this person personally now, individually, is that what you do is infectious, because you do these things which are very funny and which I love, and then I start thinking that this time I didn't do too well, but this is really good. You said, I don't know how I always end up talking about fruit, but it's got me thinking, which foods are the most holy? And being the solemn, serious person that I am, I turn to Scripture, and these are the verses which gave the best clues to the answers.
So the first one is, "The Lord is my shepherd's pie, I shall not want."
Yes, and then we move on to I am what I am. And now you have to listen carefully to the next one.
"Be still and know that I am God."
Very moving. I am the way, the truth, and the loaf.
This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
So she's saying she thinks that's pretty clear, and she'd love to know if other listeners have any other more holy foods apart from the obvious crumpets and Emmental, because they're both very holy. So, and she signs it love for your banana hater in
Yes.
chief. And I just want to say, I did have a go, and what I did was I looked in. By the way, I have to say to you, the odd banana can cause trouble, but I've known quite a lot who managed to straighten themselves out. So, anyway.
Well, you found a way to sneak that in,
I
Plas.
did, yeah. Two very little known quotes from a modern Bible translation that claims to produce much fruit. This is from the book of Ruth. Ruth was determined to continue with Naomi, come what may. See,
I really shouldn't
come what
laugh.
may. And then,
Come on.
And then from the book of Acts, chapter 4, 36 to 37, we learn of a generous apostle called Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Now listen carefully to this, who sold his property to support the new church and was thereafter known as Barnabas. So whenever you read that name in the Bible, I want you to think Barnabas. Anyway,
I have a horrible feeling, but I partly hope this will trigger out some ideas in other people.
But that's as good as I could do today. But thank you for all.
Well, it's probably as good a way to spend today as anything else, really, because we are still a bit, we're still, well, I say a bit, pretty totally defeated. We had moved into such a nice house, haven't we? But with the worst boiler ever and the most extraordinary electrical system.
Every turn of a switch or insertion of a plug is an adventure.
It is.
And we had a heating engineer come the other day who said some dreadful things as he looked at our new boiler. And I, as usual, was leaning on a wall nearby and trying to look and sound as if I knew what he was talking about. I do this a lot.
Yes.
I mean, I just end up nodding and making little grunting noises as though when he goes into language that is beyond my understanding. And I had to lean against the wall because I can't stand up for long. And I didn't want to look as though I was casual and sitting down. And should I leave and leave him to it, or should I stay and what? Anyway, it drives me mad.
These things are very complicated, really. I remember when I used to take the car in for anything, and I know other people wouldn't. You haven't got a clue what they're talking about. So it's either a case, as you say, of leaving them to it, or pretending you know, which is the worst, asking some naff question about something. It isn't easy if you're with an expert. But do you remember, Adrian, thinking about experts, and I don't know if this will relate to anyone, but it was years and forever ago when we had our first computer. Big old thing, wasn't it? Huge.
About 8 feet long.
It wasn't quite, but it was big.
Yeah.
Now, we thought we ought to have some lessons in learning how to use our computer. So we got a man to come and teach us. And I remember it very well because he sat at a chair in front of our computer and we perched like two idiots behind him while he did a load of stuff on the computer. Very impressive stuff. We paid him a lot of money, I seem to remember. It was quite a lot, really.
£40 a session, which
afterwards,
at that time was a lot of money.
It was. And we would say things like, oh, really? And, I see. Oh, so that's what you do. And then afterwards, I remember us saying, do you remember what we're supposed to do?
I tell you, it isn't even minutely untrue to say that after he'd gone, we were no better off than we had been before. We were £40 worse off.
Well, that's true. And I think it's because we weren't hands-on at all. He was. And I think he was having a lovely time. But I was thinking, if you think about the expectation that Jesus had of his disciples, you get there's 2 or 3 versions of the commissioning. I mean, when Jesus called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out demons and cure diseases and sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and heal the sick. And we're told that actually they did very well at the beginning. But those sort of challenges where you have to sort of think, how do you do it? What did he say? What? Do you remember the one where they've all come, the crowds have been there all day listening to stories, and the disciples come along and say they haven't got any food?
Yeah, I do.
And he says, what does he say? He says,
You give them something to eat. People say there's no humour in the Bible, but if you imagine Jesus watching them, probably some of the time thrilled at what was happening. They were seeing amazing things happen. And then, when it came to the point where they just wanted a sandwich, they abandoned any belief in anything and said, send them all away so we can have something to eat. And Jesus must have looked at them with a wry smile and said, he didn't actually say it apparently, but something that sort of, well, you're doing wonderful stuff.
Well, he did say,
so why don't
you give them something.
But he didn't say you're doing all that stuff.
Oh, I see.
He just said, you give them something to eat.
Yes.
In other words, you think you're doing something
And you
wonderful.
can imagine at that point them thinking, I can't think of any point in which I've learnt how to feed 5,000 people. And then, of course, there's the classic one. And we've been talking about this, haven't we? The idea that Jesus has gone up the mountain with Peter and John and James. And they're, not that they know this, the ones left behind, but they, there's great stuff going on up in that mountain. Moses and Elijah and all the rest of it, totally transfigured and everything else. And we're told, aren't we, that when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met them. And this man calls out, Teacher, I beg you, look at my son. He's my only child. And a spirit seizes him. He screams. It throws him into convulsions. He foams at the mouth. It scarcely leaves him and is destroying him. And I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they couldn't. And we were talking, weren't they, about the idea that while Jesus was up that mountain, they would go through everything they could think of that they'd seen Jesus doing,
the people
rather
left at
like
the bottom,
us after the man with the computer, or our heating engineer, thinking, which switch were we supposed to turn on? And they might have come up with some great ideas.
Well, they probably said, maybe they said, let's put him in a house, then break the roof open.
Yes.
And then let the sun down on our thingy, and then he could forgive his sins, and then that might do the trick.
Let's stick our fingers in his ears. Let's spit in the dust. Let's spit on his tongue. Let's try any number of things. It must have been awful after giving that great authority earlier to be standing wretchedly there while they came down from the mountain.
And saying, like John Wimber at the famous occasion when finally someone was healed after he'd been preaching healing for a year and everyone, as he put it, had died. He turned from the person he prayed from to the partner and said, it doesn't always work, and I'm sure the disciples at that time at the bottom of the mountain were saying, now this method doesn't always work, but it's worth a try.
Well, the great thing about that story, and if ever you get the chance to hear John Wimber talking about how his ministry began, his healing ministry that God gave him, it's a wonderful story because he's very funny in the telling it. And I remember he says, she was so sick.
Yeah,
do you remember?
So sick.
And as you say, turning away to say this doesn't usually work, and then the person being healed.
And the strange separation from yourself and the fact that it happened is what is important, isn't it? And with the disciples, it was kind of oddly practical, as Jesus said, no, this kind, they don't respond to any of that. It has to be prayer and fasting,
which they perhaps hadn't covered yet in their lessons, any more than we'd covered how to get onto Wi-Fi with our computer man.
That's right. So we're not doing too bad, actually, with our moving. I don't think either of us have any profound longings for anything really that we've left behind or lost in the move, I don't think. But I am very, very aware that certainly in me, some insecurities go very, very deep. And you don't actually meet them until there's an unexpected trigger.
What were you thinking of?
Well, today someone on the phone was talking about the Lincoln film, and he said, "Have you read? Sorry, Fed. Did you see the Lincoln film?" Which we have, and he was talking about Lincoln's sense of humour and how amazing it was to see how much, somebody at one point said, he's going to tell one of his stories again. And that's not quite how you imagine Lincoln.
No.
But the thing that we've always remembered about the Lincoln film is a very practical sort of thing, really, people were talking to Lincoln about making their way to the place where they needed to go, which is wherever as an army they had to be. And he said it's north, and they said it's north, and he said, yeah, well, I know it's north. We all know that, but the fact is, to get to this point in the north that you know where it is, you have no idea what we have to go round or over or under, who we have to battle with, how well we're going to do. And I was thinking that for all of us, those who want to get it right, and that each one of us has different emotional, physical, mental, experiential potholes and obstacles, which are going to be on the trip towards this true north, that is, for us anyway, the person you called Jesus. And it can be very, very tricky.
And interestingly, Adrian, you know, sometimes because we've been together for so long, it's easy to think we're on the same journey, but they're individual journeys, aren't they? So for you and for me, our insecurities will be different ones. Our worries will be different. I mean, physically, you do really have to watch small steps. A garage, which we now have, which has a step going into it. And it's interesting that the things that were familiar and aren't anymore. Do you know, one of the silly things is that in the house where we were, at 6 o'clock every morning, because we were right on the road, weren't we, where the house was, and that's one of the reasons we've needed to move to a bungalow, which is off-road. But there was a woman who walked her dog about 6 o'clock in the morning, and this dog gave a little sort of yippy noise. It wasn't exactly yappy, it was more of a pop, 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 pop. And that was part of a sort of signal that the morning had come and all was as it should be. And not that I ever thought that at the time, but now I'm almost listening for woof, 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 which was a positive thing, a sign that morning had come.
I
think we listen for other things, can't we?
I don't think my insecurities personally are there. I think one of the things that has struck me about this house is that it is a very security conscious house. The doors on it are incredibly expensive. We don't think we'd have spent that much on.
Well, they're solid,
doors. They're very solid and very well made. And I think deep down in me, there is something associated with that does carry a worry. And I know for me that if I indulge or obsess a bit over these fears, they can get worse and worse. And I think that has passed. I mean, I love this house, but it's a very security conscious house. And I was thinking about the fact that we've mentioned it before in Luke. Jesus talks about the three things that can weigh a person down, and one of them is cares of the world. And when those are triggered, you do have a choice about how you're going to approach those. And someone once said, all my writing is just a therapy for myself.
I think it is for a lot of writers, Adrian.
I wrote a poem called Worry, which I'll read to you, and that goes like this. No burglars came again last night, just as they failed to come the night before, and for all the nights I can remember, no burglars yet again, although I listened, as I always do, for them. Once more they did not oil and ease that rusty bolt that holds the garden gate behind the shed beside the house, nor did I hear them moving in the yard at some heart-sobbing hour, wretched hour. It was just the ticking of a clock upon my wall that sounded like the pad of evil steps 100 feet away. They did not creep inside, their blind from birth brutality reduced to stealth and whispers. They didn't stand above me, were not there with threats and intoxicated by the scent of my fear. They did not come. They were not there again last night. And what if they should never come? Such a waste of nights. I might have slept, but if I had, I feel quite sure they would have come, those burglars. Oh yes, they would have come. Well, I don't feel those things deeply anymore.
No, but there will be people who do.
There will be people who do.
And there are times when everything wobbles And that is how you feel, really, I
It
think.
is.
Where you're worrying about something, maybe a bill you can't pay or a situation you can't cope with, and all those old fears can come rumbling in that you're not going to be able to quite cope, or you're not going to be able to quite do it.
Yeah, they can grab you by the throat.
And it isn't anything new, which is perhaps why I was thinking about the disciples. Jesus chose them. He wanted them. They were still there after the resurrection. They went on to do these great things. Like we were saying, they were still... Oh, it's one really nice thing somebody said to me, Adrian. I said last week that we take ourselves with us, and after Jesus had ascended into heaven, the disciples must have thought, well, we're still just us. But this person made the point, and it's absolutely right. In the Bible it says they went back to Jerusalem rejoicing. And maybe the fact that you're not consumed by those old fears is because change has happened in you. We don't always recognise or appreciate very much the things that God has done. Little things to give us a bit more resilience and a bit more strength, and a bit more optimism, hope,
we do
and a bit
things,
more kindness, really.
We have a bank of stuff that has happened. And I think
all of us do.
I think one of the big things change. I mean, one of them for me is the realization that I'm not responsible for my journey north.
No.
I'm not in charge of all that. I'm in charge of making the decision not to turn away from that journey. But I want to go. I want to be there.
It's only the next
I
corner.
want to do it. Yeah,
that we've
just
got
the
to
next
walk
corner,
round.
the next bit. Yeah, and after that.
Anyway, thank
We
you
shall
for your
see.
emails. We'd love to hear some more fruit things, or more moving stories, or moving stories, funny stories. We just love hearing from you. So look after yourselves. And
See you next week.
yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye.